Welcome back, everyone. My name is Robin Runge. I use she, her pronouns, and I have the privilege of being the chair of the American Bar Association section on civil rights and social justice for this bar year. And I'm thrilled that so many of you have been tuning in for these chair chats. These are a wonderful opportunity for us to get to know about our leadership within the section, leaders in the bar around the country, and it is in that vein that I am particularly thrilled to have our speaker joining us today, because she wears many hats, and I think all of us have a lot to learn from her. I know I have learned a lot from her, and I happen to know that she serves as a role model in many ways to many of the members in the section. And so maybe those of you who are wondering, like, why? What do you get being in the section? Well, one of the things you get out of being in the section is you get to meet people like Pamelya, and you get to learn from people like Pamelya. So thank you, Pamelya, for giving us your time today in your very busy schedule. I'm going to do a brief introduction, and then we're going to just start having a conversation so that you can share with us the amazing things that you've been working on most recently. So some of you actually may already know that Pamelya is a member of the New Mexico House of Representatives, and has been since 2021. And we were very excited. I remember when you got elected, it was just a overwhelmingly exciting achievement. And I know you're enjoying serving in that capacity. And importantly for folks to know, you have been an active civil rights and social justice leader in New Mexico for quite some time. You've lived there since the 1980s, and you joined the Attorney General's office of the New Mexico, and you served there for many years. Also served as the General Counsel for the New Mexico Regulation and Licensing Department, and then Deputy Secretary in the New Mexico General Services Department. So you have a long history of public service for which we are all incredibly appreciative. I got to know you when you were the Executive Director of the Southwest Women's Law Center. You have been a leader in women's rights with an intersectional lens for quite some time. And so that's been an invaluable service as well. And then currently, you are the president and CEO of the KWH Law Center for Social Justice and Change, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity for you to share a little bit about that, as well as your experiences as a member of the House of Representatives in New Mexico. So if we could start, and again, thank you. It's a privilege actually to know you and to get to spend this time with you. So Pamelya, if you could just start maybe with the magic question, which is, why did you decide to become a representative? And maybe it's obvious because of the public service you had already been doing in your career, but how did that come about?
So thank you for that question, Robin. But most importantly, I am happy to be here with you. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to talk with you and to share my experiences with members of the American Bar Association and others who may be tuning in today. For many years, as you have indicated, I was involved in advocacy work, primarily focused on raising the well-being of women and women with children. And so for years, I had followed legislators around, begging them to put through legislation and asking them to please help make sure that this one gets passed. And they would run away behind a secret elevator that I could not enter. And I said, oh my gosh, if only I could make that change. Well, Melanie Stansberry, who was actually my representative in the state of New Mexico, decided to run for the position that Deb Haaland had in Congress. Deb Haaland was appointed by President Biden to be head of the Department of Interior. Melanie Stansberry then decided to pursue the position that Deb Haaland was leaving, and I had helped Melanie get elected to her position in the Congress. So when that position came open, I said, you know what? It's my time. I shouldn't be chasing any people around anymore. I should have a seat at the table. And sure enough, people joined me and helped to make sure that I did have a seat at the table because I had been helping so often in areas that many people don't have a voice in our judicial system, and I wanted to make sure that they did. So that was why I decided to run for that legislature and for the legislative position. And I am very happy that I did because the results have been very rewarding.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I mean, that I love hearing the story of how, and then your expertise, right? I think maybe people watching this are thinking, well, I couldn't do that, but you're pointing out like you have a lot of positions that maybe didn't have legislator in the title, but you were working on these issues and advocating. I think many of us can relate to that, especially the nonprofit field, right? Like you, like I have been walking the halls of Congress for years, right? Chasing people down the street. I totally relate to that. I think many people can. And what we don't realize though, and what you have really demonstrated is over those years, Pamelya, you developed an incredible amount of expertise and knowledge and network, right? Like you knew a lot of the people that you were going to be working with, and your deep commitment is tremendous. And I think it's so important for people with your commitment to be in these positions. So that's a great segue to hearing from you a little bit about some of the key issues that you've been able to work on and chosen to work on, and maybe even some of the committees that you've been working on. I know it's been several years, and I know there are probably many things. But actually, and before we do that, tell us a little bit about the legislative term, right? Like, how does this work, right? I remember many years ago, I thought that all elected officials, legislators, were full time, right, year round, and I have since been educated that that's not always the case, and that many of you retain other positions throughout the year because it's actually not a position that's intended to be full time. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the mechanics and then about what you've been working on.
So absolutely, I'm happy to share that experience. One of the things that I should let our audience know is looking a little bit more at my background. One of the things that I did after graduating from law school was I went to work for a big eight accounting firm because I majored in accounting as an undergraduate. And in order to get your certification as a certified public accountant, you really had to work in the area before you would get the certificate. That was the rule back when I got my certification.
Makes
So I
sense.
worked for a big eight accounting firm in their tax department. But after I worked there long enough to get the experience under my belt, I moved to the Department of Treasury Internal Revenue Service, where I was working in the Department of Treasury for the IRS, your friend and mine, first in the Estate and Gift Tax Division, and then, of course, in the Office of District Counsel, where I helped to litigate cases and provided that litigation experience. And so you mentioned
Mm.
that I worked in state government. Those were areas that I was able to gather experience and expertise so that when I did move into the legislature, I had a great deal of background in terms of
Wow.
any type of issue that was going to be presented, whether it was a tax issue, whether it was going to be an issue affecting an agency at a state government level, or even a budget issue because of my accounting background. So all of those came into play, and I
Mm.
was really happy about that. And those are some of the things that I talked about when people were looking to replace Melanie Stansberry. So once I
Mm.
got to the legislature, I initially was assigned to the division, to the tax committee, and I worked in that area, which was really great, something that I'd been doing for a while. And I also worked in an environmental area so that we looked at lots and lots of environmental issues in the state of New Mexico where water is a primary concern and how
Yeah.
we're going to continue to protect that. Well, I had had so much experience in those issues, I was ready to move to something else, primarily the things that I had done in my capacity as an advocate, looking at the health care and reproductive health care for women and children.
Mm.
So I was
Mm-hmm.
assigned to the Legislative Health and Human Services Committee. And what really
Mm.
is exciting about that is I was named as the vice chair of the committee, and here I was basically a neophyte in the legislature, but not in the operations of it.
Right. Right.
So, so I was there, and then I was placed on the House Appropriation and Finance Committee as we put together a budget. So all
Oh,
of the things
wow.
that I had done in the past came to fruition and helping me with what I do in my legislative work. So those are the committees that I've been assigned to. And
Mhm.
let me just share with you a couple of things that happened once I got into the legislature. So during my first term in the legislature, or when I filled Melanie Stansberry's seat, I was sworn in on June 21st, 2021, and just 2 months later, August, I think it was the 13th of 2021, there was a little 13-year-old boy by the name of Benny Hartgrove who was trying to mediate a dispute between two students, one who was being bullied allegedly and one that was bullied. I was sitting in my law office at the time, and there were all of these sirens and these helicopters that were flying overhead. I'm going, what in the world could that be? I learned that in trying to mediate this dispute, Benny Hartgrove did not know that one of the students who came to school that day, who was a part of that proceeding, brought a gun with him and shot Benny 6 times on the playground during lunchtime in front of all of those students. So the first piece of legislation that I decided to put forth was we have got to make sure that individuals who own firearms must keep them safely stored and
Hmm.
secure and out of the hands of minors. So that was my first piece of legislation. And I must say
Wow.
that the way New Mexico is set up, we have two very different situations. We have a 30-day session, which is directly associated with a budget. It is something called the governor's choice. So if you want to have something heard, the governor would have to put out a message on the legislation. The
Hmm.
second is the 60-day session, which is just open and anybody can present anything. Well, we tried in the 30-day session to present this bill looking at firearms safe storage. 30 days is not a long time in which to get an initial piece of legislation passed. So we had to move to the 60-day session, which just ended in
Mm.
March of 2023. But during
Mm.
that session, we were able to get that safe storage legislation passed. I'm just happy to say that. And not only that, but it was really important to make sure that we are taking care of families who have who have had individuals who've been harmed by gun violence. And in
Yeah.
that situation, what was really important for the family is if we could name that playground after the little boy who was killed, Benny Hartgrove, and we
Oh,
did that. So that playground,
wow.
there's a park and playground area that's named after Benny Hartgrove, but it was really important. His family wanted to make sure that we didn't include the word memorial. They wanted it to
Mm.
be a playground named after Benny, but that people will remember him for his lifetime and what he was doing and the good things he was doing before he passed away, even at the young age of 13. So I
Oh,
present that to you, and it has
oh,
been awesome to see that we've been able to lift up the family and help them through a very tragic situation. And I will tell you about just a couple of other things in that area.
please. And I just
One
want
of
to
the
pause
things
though
that,
and say, Pamela, congratulations.
thank you.
And thank you for that. I mean, and just hearing how that came about is so informative to all of us, right? Because I think we sometimes wonder, right, when we hear about these tragedies in our communities, like what can our public officials do for us, right? And you saw that and you picked it up and you looked and saw a gap in protections, right? That
We
would
did.
really have made a difference and you ran with that. And it took a year and a half, but I just congratulations. And I'm thinking about that family, but also all the families throughout New Mexico, right, who are going to be safer because of those protections. So, but yeah, okay. And I can't imagine what else you've done in addition to that, because that must have been extremely difficult and time consuming. So,
Well, let me just close the gap on that safe gun storage legislation and what has happened since then. So
yeah.
after, of course, President Biden is in office, then what he created was the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, and he named
Mm,
the Vice President Kamala Harris to head that
I
office.
saw that.
And just recently, the president and the vice president called for a convening of legislators to come together and to talk about how do we collaborate on a bigger scale to try
Hmm.
to prevent so much gun violence from happening in our state. I
Mm.
went to that convening. I was invited, the only legislator from the state of New Mexico to represent our interests and to talk about what we had done. But Robin, the
Wow.
biggest thing that I want to share with you is that the president and vice president set out 6 initiatives that they would like to have happen as a part of that convening. One of which
Yeah.
is that states would enact safe gun storage legislation. New Mexico, it was accomplished. So that was good. We had already completed one. And the other
Yeah.
item that was brought up was how do we help and strengthen families who've gone through a
That's
particular
right.
issue involving a victim of gun
Yeah.
violence. And we did
Yeah.
that too. We named a park after young Benny Hartgrove.
Oh, wow. And Pamela, it makes so much sense to me that you would be there at that convening. And what a great opportunity for legislators from other states to learn, right? As you just said, it can be done, right? Both of those things can be done, and to lift that up as an example, because I'm sure there are many states that are trying to figure out, and state legislators who are trying to figure out how to keep our kids safer and our families safer, right? Safe storage is not just about schools, though it definitely will improve things in that capacity, but it's for all of us. So that's just tremendous. And the leadership, as you've highlighted, from President Biden and from Vice President Harris is tremendous. So I'm so thrilled that you were able to bring that expertise, right? And again, it's important for people to see and understand, how do these things get connected, right? How does the work you're doing in Mexico, right? How does that travel, right? Not just physically, but around, in all the ways. What are the opportunities for learning and from sharing for with others? So you mentioned there were a few other things that you've been able to do. We'd love to hear about those as well.
Well, let me switch gears for just a moment and away from my work in the legislature, because in New Mexico we are, if I'm not mistaken, the only legislature in the entire state that does not get paid. And so everyone and people wonder, why would someone in the legislature have another job? Well, because we have to turn on the lights like anybody else and make
Yes,
sure that our
yes.
family can eat. And I do have a nonprofit law center. It is KWH Law Center for Social Justice and Change. And the KWH is named in honor of my mother, who was a big advocate for women. We grew up in Texas, and women didn't have a lot of rights. They couldn't even own land unless there was a man to sign for them to own that property. And so when I had the opportunity to do so, I opened up this law center in her honor, and I said, I'm going to continue the fight for women's rights and for children and for
Mm.
families with children. And so I've been able to do that. So
Oh,
I'm happy about that one.
that's tremendous. I'm not thrilled to hear that all this work you're doing as a legislator is voluntary. Like, I just need to say, like, as an aside, I think there's, the employment lawyer in me is like, wait a minute. But this is just so tremendous for you to be able to honor your mother that way, and I'm sure you're doing amazing work in that capacity as well.
Well, what we're focusing on primarily is helping individuals who are low income, maybe
Hmm.
not exceeding 138% of the poverty level. And
Hmm.
we are really looking strongly at women are survivors of domestic violence. And New Mexico is one of those states that has a high domestic violence rate. So, how do
Hmm.
we help women? And what we do, number one, is try to make sure that no woman ever goes to court without representation. So we have organizations like New Mexico Legal Aid, which is there to do exactly that, but sometimes they have conflicts and sometimes they don't have the capacity. So what we
Yeah.
do at KWH Law Center is try to get every single attorney who can do so to volunteer at least 50 hours of their time a year in helping to raise the well-being of somebody. And the Supreme Court actually said that 50 hours of aspirational time for each attorney to put forth. It's not required to get your license renewed,
Hmm.
but it is something that is an aspiration on their part. So I will
Wow.
just tell you, in terms of what we do, is we have not only been making sure that trying to make sure that no woman ever goes to court without an attorney, but then what else happens in their lives beyond the legal aspect,
Right.
the rest
Right.
of the story. So we want to try to help make sure that they could enter something like women in the trades, where the income is highly
Hmm.
successful in terms of being able to advance the financial resources of a family, and then
Hmm.
also trying to make sure that there is money otherwise available for them to walk away from a domestic violence situation. So we
Right.
helped in creating something called CU Safe. That's a credit union survivor alliance for financial
Oh,
empowerment.
that's amazing. Oh my gosh. Tell us more about the now, this is where our interests overlap. I'd love to hear more about this credit union. This is so entrepreneurial and so necessary. Help us to understand how that works.
So the idea was first presented to U.S. Eagle Federal Credit Union in New Mexico to say, what we need to do is to have funding available so people can pay their rent, a down payment perhaps, for moving into a house or apartment. But it's also important to make sure that they have access to transportation. I've been
Mm.
talking with a person who has or leads the, I guess, the lobbying, for lack of another word, for the Automobile Association. But what we want them automobile dealers to be able to do is to provide transportation. Maybe it's a used car, maybe it's a new car, but don't show these women something they couldn't afford anyway, but something that's affordable and cars that you can make available to
Yeah.
individuals who will need that transportation. We don't have a huge mass transportation system in New Mexico, and one
Hmm.
of the things they do need is access to a good automobile.
Absolutely. Wow. Pamela, I don't know when you sleep. You are absolutely changing the world. And I think everyone watching this will take away from this just incredible inspiration and appreciation for you and your leadership, not just in your local community, but your state and nationwide. And so I just want to personally thank you. And I also want to lift up that in addition to that, you are a leader in the civil rights and social justice section in several different capacities. And so I hope folks will join us so that they can get to know you and get to work with you, whether it be on our African Affairs Committee or something else, because I know I've enjoyed that, and I learned so much from you today that I didn't know. And so thank you for giving your time today and for all of your service, frankly, your entire career. And before you became a lawyer and as a lawyer, you were a model for what we need for fighting for civil rights and social justice, even on a voluntary basis as a member of your state legislature. So, so thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Robin, always to talk with you because you two are the most amazing person that I know.
Thank you. You're very sweet.